So welcome to Northern Powerhouses, our business success stories series of interviews, where we discuss with local business leaders their backgrounds, their successes and challenges, and what's really driving them forwards. And this morning, I'm delighted to have with us Andy Cheetham, who's the director at Lime Licensing Group. So Andy, firstly, thanks for spending some time with us. And if you'd like to introduce yourself and Lime Licensing Group to the audience, what you do and how you help people, that would be great.
Yeah, sure. So Lime Licensing Group is a franchise consultancy firm, and what that essentially means that we work with mainly private companies to create a franchise system, which they then use to scale what is typically a regional business into a national one. So we're the people who would tell them how to do that and input into all the decisions around that. And our typical client is characterized probably by a company who's looking to expand beyond where they are now in a region, and franchising is one of the ways that they can do it. Not the only way, of course, but one of the ways that they can do it. And I founded the company in 2008, and prior to that, I was a franchisor myself over many years. So one way or another, I've done 30 years in the franchise industry now, which always makes me feel a bit old.
Wonderful. And as we were talking earlier, Actually Coach itself is a franchise business, and you know, for me, joining a franchise, but B, creating franchises are the best way to grow a business effectively. It really, you know, for me, gets you into the detail of making sure the systems, the processes, everything is in place to create a successful business.
Yeah, it's funny actually. A lot of the brands that we work with, they almost use it as a bit of an excuse to have a bit of a recap of lots of the things that they're doing and the systems that they've got in place before they actually launch a franchise. And that's there's a slight irony to that, because franchising, when you sort of really strip it all down, is about replicating what's already there.
Yeah.
And so to take the opportunity to sort of maybe even have a rebrand or to refresh things, it's kind of, you're not really replicating what was already there. So, but it's quite a common thing. But I suppose the heart's very much in the right place, because when you're bringing franchise partners in, you obviously want them to do as well as they can possibly do, and to not just learn from all the mistakes they've got, but if the management see that actually there's a few things they probably ought to do now, then they use that as an excuse to get that out of the way before the first franchisee comes on board.
Yes, of course. Brilliant. Just on that note, what would be the most sort of memorable business that you've helped to franchise, whether it's a type of business or a particular thing they did? What were the ones that stand out for you?
It's probably the first company that I was involved with in franchising, and that was our family business. We supplied pretty much the convenience sector, which was post offices, forecourts, small convenience retailers, and newsagents with greetings cards. And we were essentially launching a franchise, having had a few goes at it and not doing particularly well. So what I mean by that was, originally we put some salespeople on, bought them company cars, and they were salaried reps selling greetings cards. And whilst our sales were fairly good, our overheads were quite high. We got quite a lot of bad debt, and that was in the early 90s, through the recession then, if anyone's old enough to remember that. And so that didn't work particularly well, but we stayed in business. And then we decided what we would use self-employed agents who typically carry a portfolio of other brands. And they were commission only. We had about 23 of those around the UK, and to a greater or lesser extent, our bottom line was still just as okay as it was, but nothing to write home about. And so we had a great idea that we would supply the distributive trade, and there's being wholesalers and cash and carriers, and they would sell to the retailers. And like another year or so on, again, we're still in the same position, you know, with this fantastic business, but still not really making very much money. And then we came across franchising, and it was kind of the only option left to scale that business.
Right.
And franchising was the absolute golden key. We found straight away that we were dealing with people who have chosen us as a franchisor, chosen that line of business, whereas employed people, the reality is they'd take any number of jobs really that are similar, but franchisees tend to choose from one or two, no more. And because every franchisee was self-employed, it got them out of bed in the morning. They'd put money in, which is a driver, of course, because you literally are invested in the business. And we built a company that had been struggling for several years, doing it the more traditional way, if you like. And over the next 10 years, we had 3 retail supply brands, supplying something like 10,000 retailers around the UK, a number of the English-speaking overseas countries as well, the Spanish Costas in particular, New Zealand. And we had, 160, 170 franchise agreements in place. And it's never ceased to amaze me how close we were for many years. But franchising, it was the same business, we just did it in a different way, and it just skyrocketed the company. And so I've always remembered that. To a lot of my clients, that because you never know quite how close you are to a breakthrough in business, do you? A lot of the time, it's staying in the game and not being afraid of trying a new route to your market, isn't it?
Absolutely. So you literally franchised your own business as the first point of this journey.
Yeah, and I wish I knew someone like me back then, because the admission is, we've literally made every mistake there is in franchising. And the annoying thing is sometimes you make the same mistake twice before you learn from it, don't you? And along that way to building what was a bigger than average franchise network, I think we encountered most things, and we don't have the solution to all things, but I think we've got the knowledge to know the outcomes of any things that happen to a franchisor. But yeah, it was our own business that was franchised, and that's when we sold that in 2002. I then started advising other franchisors how they could do the same, and I was a bit of a jobbing franchise consultant on my own. And more recently, Lime Licensing Group, which was a brand that, because I've always worked in a branded environment, I felt we shouldn't be Andy the franchise consultant. It should be a proper brand. So we created Lime Licensing Group, and that has now grown as well. And our regional offices are run under a franchise arrangement. So we've practiced what we preached and franchised our own company as well.
Wonderful. That's great example of being your own case study. I love that. And I guess growing up, was this what you always saw yourself doing, or did you have other plans as a boy?
No, I didn't even know what a franchise was. In fact, I didn't really until we hit this sort of crossroads of trying sales reps and agents and the distributive trade. It was almost at the point where, that's franchising might be all right, might not, I don't know, but I don't know what I'd have done if I hadn't have ended up in the franchise industry. It's kept me interested for a long time, and I think I just love the environment where I'm self-employed. Our clients are typically privately owned businesses, so they're self-employed, and their franchisees are self-employed. So everybody's self-employed. I just think it's a really good environment to be in. Yeah. But I think when I was looking forward as a young man into my career, I was probably thinking I'd probably be doing something in sport. It's the only thing I was any good at.
Brilliant. and looking back over, I guess both Lime Licensing Group, but I get that journey of transforming your business into a franchise. What would you say some of the biggest issues you've had to overcome?
The biggest issue for all franchisors is finding the right franchise partners, really. You can create a franchise system and you can skip things and do them later and sort of fudge your way along a bit. But the problem is when you set a franchise network up, all of those decisions are into fairly long-term contracts with your franchisees, 5, 7, 10 years sometimes. And so if you haven't put all the good things you could do in that engagement at the beginning, you're kind of going to kick yourself for the length of those contracts. And so I think that's the first point. But then secondly, getting the right franchise partners is everything. Because a franchisee who doesn't share your values, doesn't have the right skill set, it's only going to end in tears. But sometimes you don't know you don't know what their values are until you're working together, do you? No. So I think finding the right franchise partners is always the biggest challenge for all franchisors, us included, and all of our clients too.
Yeah, brilliant. That makes perfect sense. I mean, I've always believed for a long time that good relationships come with a match of goals. We both want to achieve the same thing, but great relationships come with a match of values. We both believe the same things are important, and if you get that right, as you say, what whether and I suggest it's true across franchisees, employees, customers, suppliers, even it's finding people that believe the same things are important, and things start to go right when you do. Just as an aside, if I may, I remember our founder, Brad Sugars, talking quite a long time ago. One thing he said, and it's always stuck in my mind when he was talking about franchises, he said most people see a lot of people externally see franchises as sort of 80% systems and 20% relationships. But his view was very strongly that the systems are really, really key. However, it's 80% relationship and 20% systems. In other words, you really got to build that strong relationship between the franchisor and the franchisees. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it sounds about right. And but in any franchise arrangement, it's I don't know about 80-20, but it's bearing in mind that franchising is about replication.
Yes,
it's about finding people who will replicate the system. It's often called the system, and there is a not just a contractual duty to do that, but I think there's also almost a moral obligation. If you're going to join a franchise system, don't do it if you want to go and carve your own way in the world. Do it because you're going to replicate what the franchisor is doing.
Yes.
If you're a level above franchising in an entrepreneurial scale, then you're just going to bounce around too much on the boundaries of a franchise arrangement. It's not going to suit you. The best franchisees can follow the systems, respect the fact that franchisor is showing them all the trade secrets, assisting them to get into business. And so whilst Brad is right, it's 80% about the people. The systems are very important because good franchisees can follow those systems.
Yeah, it was really clear that the systems were critical. It was almost like it's not just about the systems. And I guess going back to getting the right franchisee, it is that sort of relationship between the franchisor and the franchisee got to be strong. No, absolutely brilliant. And you made me think there, Andy, because I joined actually quite a long time ago, and I guess I was one of the early adopters. And I suppose, as being fairly entrepreneurial, I probably spent far too long trying to do it my way rather than realizing that was the point of the franchise. And it's like, once you start to just follow the system and do the things that the franchise already knows works, that's why they're giving you those secrets, as you say. Then life becomes much more simple. So
if you think about all the things that you've learned in your career, a franchisor is distilling all of those into their franchise opportunity. So there's no point in you trying to learn to ride the bike again or reinvent the wheel. Follow the system and enjoy it. There's a lot of the time the way that things are done is not evident to you until you've spent quite a bit of time at it, isn't it?
Yeah.
So for any franchisee, follow the system, live and breathe it, but don't really question it too much. Until you've truly got your feet under the table, but then the franchisor needs to listen to the franchisees, because in many ways, and there's a lot of examples of this, that because the franchisees are getting more sharp-end experience than the franchisor, some of the best ideas come off the franchise network then. So you've still got to listen to each other a lot. Absolutely,
and that's very much the case within my organisation. We meet regularly. We're on online a lot, sharing, and it's really interesting. I train a lot of the new coaches. I have done over time, and some of the sort of mantras I say, look, these are some of my learnings, and they start with follow the system, trust the system, value the system, because potentially we can pay reasonable amounts of investment to do it. And what's the point if not? Brilliant. Thank you. It's lesson learned. So what would you say some of the biggest learnings you've had about business, Andy, through your career?
Do you mean about me personally or generally?
Just about business. What are some of the things that for anyone listening that you'd say is crucial to a successful business?
I heard a lovely phrase many years ago, and it's always stuck with me, and it's that you get results from what you focus on.
Yeah.
And so I think that encapsulates a lot of things to me,
Yes.
because there's always a lot of businesses are formed in a bit of a cautious way sometimes, and I don't mean to be too gun ho about it, but when you really live and breathe it and you really commit to it, it's funny how you get the rub of the green, and things
Yeah.
work well for you. And I think when you focus completely on what it is you're trying to do,
Yep.
because there's so many distractions around any kind of business, isn't there? You could sit in front of a computer all day long and actually achieve nothing at the end of it, couldn't you?
Yep.
But focusing on what it is that you really need to be doing, I've always reminded me of that, because I'm probably more guilty of it than most, because I've got such a sort of wandering eye in business anyway, that when I pull myself back down and I think, right, well, where are we going with this, and what is it that we need to do? I think that phrase, you get results from what you focus on, is a really powerful one. I think it's true whichever way you analyze it. There's a
Yes.
truth behind it.
Yeah, my coach has got a great phrase, which is along those lines, and he says, and yeah, energy flows where focus goes, and it's just like,
Yeah,
I think it's bang on. I absolutely love it, and I think it was Stephen Covey said, I think I love his phrase, which again he's sort of going back to first principles, which is the main thing is to make the main thing the main thing. It sounds a bit silly, but it's just, yeah, let's just get that focus in place. And Andy, I think you're aware we're a coaching, a business coaching organisation. I'm keen to know who the best coaches you've worked with, whether that's in business, sport, or life in general.
well, you learn a bit from everyone, don't you?
Yeah.
But I've never had a coach, but I wish I did have a coach, particularly when I started off in franchising. I think I made that point earlier on. If I only knew then what I knew now.
Yes.
If I was starting a new company now, I would definitely get a coach, because it's just the distilled wisdom of someone who's been there. You get a little bit of a crystal ball, don't you? And you see some decisions being made, and you kind of know what that's going to lead to and what's going to happen in the future because of it. But that's only through experience, isn't it? So I think now, unfortunately, because I've made so many errors, and I'm not going to make them anymore. To me, the value of a coach when I was starting would have been immeasurable. And I just wish I had a really good mentor and a good coach to work with me, but I probably couldn't afford it anyway. But as soon as I could have afforded it, I should have done it. I definitely should.
I think one of my colleagues, I think he made the point that it's a bit, having a business coach, an effective business coach, is a bit like Nanny McPhee from the film, which was, I think, when you need me but don't want me, I'll appear, and when you want me but don't need me, I'll go. And it's quite an interesting thing, and it's one of the reasons, funnily enough, that I rarely, we as an organisation, but certainly my experiences, we rarely work with startup businesses, because what we often see is the startup business, not so much from an investment point, because we've got lots of different range of services, but when people really found a business, there is that absolute, go back to your point about focus, there's that absolute focus, determination. They have their vision, and they're often not that interested about other people's opinion at that point, and often rightly so. I think they have to, and I often say, they need a couple of years of getting the crap kicked out of them a little bit before maybe it's worth talking to other people about how maybe things could be better. And I guess that's, I wonder if you see that in what you, in how you operate sometimes, about how, when people finally come to talk to you about franchising what they do.
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
As you said in your own business, it was finding a different way, wasn't it? That you went from sort of a good business to a great business when you found that route.
Yeah, and there's a lot of trial and error before then, but yeah. So it's never. I've always remembered it. The number of times I was thinking, well, I should probably jack this in, or go and get a job, or take a perceived easier route. The point I made earlier, you never know how close you are. Sometimes you just got to stay in the game and not be afraid of trying new things.
I think the phrase and the example, this idea of being 3 feet from gold. I don't know if you've heard that phrase or that example of. I think it was like the third biggest gold strike in the Klondike gold rush was a guy that he'd worked really hard on his claim for sort of years and got nowhere, and finally gave up and sold his claim for like $100 or whatever. And the guy that bought it, he dug 3 more feet and hit this massive seam of gold. And you know, it's I guess it's a lesson for us all sometimes, isn't it? Is keep going.
Like the fifth Beatle.
Yes, yeah, that's right. Yes. Damn.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's interesting actually. A lot of the people I interview, you know, the resilience comes up a lot, and the determination and focus, as you've highlighted, comes up a lot as a common factor with many people. It's A, right, being really clear what they want to achieve, but B, doing whatever it takes.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah.
So alongside obviously the focus idea, is there any other favourite quotes or sayings you find yourself falling back on in good or challenging times, Andy?
I don't know favourite sayings, and I suppose to a degree, if I did have a lot more, then I wouldn't be focusing, would I? so get results in what you focus on. Stick to that one, and you should be okay.
I'll take that. That's a great point. Fair point, well made. And about learning things, what have you learned about yourself throughout your journey, Andy?
Definitely, I have an attention span issue. I completely take my hat off to people who can be in fundamentally the same line of business day in, day out over many years. I think it's a really fantastic thing to be able to do. Yep. I'm very lucky in my career that I get to work with a lot of different businesses. And so that suits my personality and my attention span. If I had to do the same thing every day, I wouldn't be able to. I just don't think I'm very good at it. I'm not sure how long I would last, if I'm honest.
No, I can totally align with that idea. I think same here. I just love the variation of business, the variation of business people, and just, you know, uncovering what's going on. So no, I totally get that. So focusing back on yourself and Lime, what does the future look like for you guys, and what challenges do you face, if any, do you think?
It's a really good question, that, and I think we've always got slight differences as each year rolls past, but we're very vested in technology. I think all businesses are, aren't they, these days, really?
Yes.
Automations, and when I look at for what is a relatively simple role as a franchise specialist, you know, the technology and the software around what we do. You know, we've got subscriptions on Zapier and subscriptions to CRM that cost an inordinate amount of money, and subscriptions on Zoom like this, and subscriptions for this and subscriptions for that. Technology. But actually, you know, each time I come back to just that human side of business, where you're meeting people, sitting down with them, seeing the whites of their eyes, that sort of thing. I do wonder if actually, in our case too, actually, if the pendulum swung a bit too far. You know, people are people at the end of the day. I think you respond better when, as the saying, isn't there, about so much of communication, the tiny bit is actually what you say, isn't it? It's how it's said and your body language and things like that. And so I think from our point of view, I'm still a bit traditional, really, where I think if I can get to meet somebody face to face, that's an outcome I want from an initial conversation. Now, Zoom has sort of given us a little half step between the phone call and a Zoom meeting, which is great. You know, it's a nice way to sort any deal breakers out the way, isn't it? But to me, always, I kind of want to get to that point where you sit down over a cup of tea and you get to know that person. I think when businesses rely too much on technology, it's that maybe it works for some, but I think I need a bit of convincing that we should go all in that way in our own case.
No, I feel the same. I much prefer to be, you know, with people. I guess it has, you know, it really has obviously transformed the ability to be a lot more efficient in many ways. But it's efficiency, but not necessarily effectiveness. I guess maybe the difference between the two. And I'm really interested to ask you this question, because from your, especially from your point of view, what would you say to anyone that was thinking of going into business right now?
What we look for, I mean, all franchisees essentially are startups. Not all, the vast majority of startups where they're starting a new business. And I think from our point of view, there's a few things that are always nice to know. And one is that the franchisee is acknowledging that there's no easy business. The statistics around the franchise industry are quite spectacular in terms of the profitability of your average franchisee versus non-franchise businesses. But I still haven't met anybody who's earning 100 grand a year who isn't working very hard. I think when we ask people, what are their reasons for wanting to go into business, I kind of want them to say to me, it's because I've always wanted to work for myself. But sometimes we get answers, because there's some redundancies coming round, or there's a forced crossroads in their career, and that's kind of the wrong answer, really. I think you're no longer in a position where you've got to start work at 9 and finish at 5, and you're answerable to somebody else. When you're self-employed, you've got to get yourself out of bed, and that self-discipline, that motivation that you need is actually a bit higher than probably a lot of people who haven't had self-employment experience acknowledge. It's no easy route, is it? So by all means, I think when you're running your own business, as I've got really accustomed to, the benefits are fantastic, but it really it can appear to be a bed of roses for people looking from the outside in, and it most definitely isn't. But when you're there, the gratification is great. So I think don't assume it's easy. And I've met probably more people than maybe anyone you'll have ever met, because our own company, we've recruited thousands of franchisees, and I've probably met tens of thousands to get to that point. All who've got this desire to become self-employed. I think if I could make sure all of them knew that it's going to be hard, and that they're going to have to live and breathe that business, maybe outside of the hours that they've been used to as well, then at least they're going in with their eyes wide open.
That makes a lot of sense. And again, I'm thinking back to my career within this franchise. And I remember my franchise right on day one saying, there's two ways to sort of run this, and that's hard, easy, or easy, hard. But if you work hard, it becomes easy. If you think it's easy, it will become harder. And I have to say, I did learn that lesson. I did have to experience a little bit to learn the lesson. But yeah,
it's a good phrase. Yeah,
it really stuck with me, because it was, I guess more in hindsight, because I guess, and like I suspect many franchisees, I don't know, but you have that positive, you almost have to have that positive mindset that everything's going to be great. And if you're not careful, you believe your own press too much, and then we start to maybe not, ramp off a little bit. So I do remember that very well, and I did learn that lesson, although it was quite a while ago. And if you started again, Andy, is there anything you would do differently, do you think?
So it's a really good question. I suppose there's always things you do differently, isn't it? But I think, ironically, because it sounds the wrong thing to say, because Lime Licensing Group is very much about business startup and franchising in particular.
Yeah.
So it's quite a risky thing inherently, I suppose. But I think I've always actually been fairly cautious. Really, sounds a contradiction, doesn't it? But I've always been a fairly cautious person. So I think probably, if I was going to wind back and have a little word with myself 30 years ago, I'd probably say I should be a bit braver, a bit bolder, a bit more confident in what I'm doing. Whereas I've always tended to be quite careful, I think. But then youth is wasted on the young, isn't it? If I knew now what I knew then, I probably would be fine to be braver, wouldn't I? But I've sort of felt my way along carefully, I suppose. So probably be a bit braver.
Yeah, I think it's just the learning, isn't it? As you say, and many of us have to go through the learning to get the learning. It would be a nice thing to do, to be able to go back and sort of advise ourselves. But yeah, no, it's just good to get that sort of view of things. Well, that's been really fascinating and really interesting. There's a really really valuable lessons for anyone in business. in general, I would suggest, irrespective of whether they are or thinking of franchising what they do. But for anyone that's interested in what you do, Andy, what would be the best way, if they wanted to contact you or the company, what would be the best way of doing so?
Probably pop on our website, technology again, which is lionlicensinggroup.co.uk. But if they just type my name in followed by the word franchise, they'll find me quite easily on any search engine, I would think.
Brilliant. Well, once again, Andy, thank you so much, and hopefully we may get to speak again and run one of these in maybe a year or two's time, and just pick your brains in another way.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure, Chris.
Thank you.